most of us think we're paying attention. We listen, we look, we nod. But notice this. The moment something happens, your mind is already finishing it. Before the sound fully reaches your ears, before the feeling settles in your body, there's a quiet click. You know what it is. You know what it means. You know where it's going. That feels efficient. It feels responsible. It feels like how an adult is supposed to function. And yet, if that were truly attention, why does life so often feel slightly distant, like you're present, but not quite here? This isn't a video to convince you of anything. It's an invitation to slow down just enough, to notice something you normally miss, because it seems too ordinary to matter. If you stay with it, not rushing to agree or disagree, there may come a moment where you realize you've been very alert, and still not in touch. Take your time with this. There's a reason the mind does this so quickly. Think about a normal workday. An email comes in, you read the first line, and almost instantly you know what kind of email it is. Urgent, annoying, something you'll deal with later. That snap judgment isn't random. It saves time, it keeps things moving. Without it, you'd be stuck rereading the same message over and over, trying to decide how to feel. The same thing happens with people. Someone speaks a certain way, uses a familiar tone, you already know who they are in that moment. Difficult, reliable, not worth explaining yourself to. This ability didn't appear by accident. It's how we survive complexity. It's how we function in a crowded world with limited time and energy. And socially, it's almost required. Imagine stopping every conversation to fully experience it. Without assumptions, without reading between the lines, you'd miss cues. You'd fall behind. You might even seem strange. So the mind learns to move fast, to summarize, to conclude. And most of the time it works. But pause here for a second. When was the last time you noticed how often that speed decides for you, before you've actually felt what's happening? Not in a dramatic way, just quietly. The habit feels necessary because it is useful, because it's rewarded, because life, as it's structured now, doesn't slow down to wait for deeper contact. Nothing is wrong with that. And yet, sometimes in the middle of all this efficiency, there's a faint sense of being slightly ahead of yourself, responding to things you already think you understand. It's subtle, easy to ignore. But once noticed, it doesn't completely disappear. Have you noticed how rarely you actually meet a moment fresh? You walk into a room you've been in 100 times. Your body is there, but something else arrives first. The idea of the room, how it usually feels, what tends to happen there. Nothing dramatic, just a quiet shortcut. Think about scrolling through your phone. A face appears. Before you register the expression, there's already a story. Successful, trying too hard, just another opinion. You don't argue with that story. You don't even notice it forming. It simply stands in for what's happening. And here's the strange part. The world doesn't disappear when this happens. You're still functioning, still responding, still doing what needs to be done. But contact becomes thinner. It's like watching life through a clean window. Everything is visible, nothing is wrong, and yet, you're not quite inside. The shortcut saves effort, but it also decides the distance. And most days, that distance feels normal enough that it never gets questioned. Until, occasionally, something doesn't land the way it should, a conversation feels flat, a place feels oddly empty, a moment passes without leaving a trace. It's not that something went wrong. It's more that something subtle was already missing before you noticed it was gone. Let's slow this down with something ordinary. Right now, wherever you are, there's weight in your body, maybe in your feet, maybe in the chair beneath you. Here's the question, not a clever one, just simple. Are you aware of that weight, or are you aware that you know about it? At first, it feels like the same thing. Your mind says, yes, I feel it. And that answer arrives quickly. But stay a moment longer. Before the word pressure, before the idea of sitting, there's sensation raw, unfinished, quietly changing. Notice how fast the mind wants to step in, to name it, to be done with it. That naming feels like contact, but it's more like a summary, a label placed after the fact. For a brief second, if you don't rush to recognize, there's no commentary, no description, just sensation doing what it does. You can't hold it. The moment you try, it turns back into an idea. So you don't hold it. You simply notice the difference between knowing something is happening and being where it's happening. That difference is small, almost disappointingly small. And yet, once seen, it doesn't feel theoretical anymore. It feels closer. Once you notice that small gap, you start seeing it elsewhere. Take an emotion, let's say irritation. Something happens, a comment, a delay, a look that feels off. Almost immediately, there's a familiar sentence inside. I'm irritated. Or maybe, this always happens. That sentence feels like honesty, like self-awareness. But if you stay with the moment, there's more going on than the sentence captures. Tightness somewhere, heat, a quickening, then a softening, then something else. The emotion is moving, the label isn't. The same thing shows up socially. Think about money. On a screen, it's just numbers, clean, stable, convincing. But notice how your body reacts when those numbers change: relief, tension, a subtle shift in how you hold yourself. The concept feels solid, the experience is anything but. And then there's the quiet story of who you are, not spoken out loud, just assumed. The competent one, the reasonable one, the person who has things figured out. That story helps you function, it keeps things consistent. But sometimes, in the middle of a day that looks fine, there's a faint mismatch. You're doing what fits the story, while something underneath has already moved on. Nothing collapses, life goes on. It's just that, in these moments, it becomes harder to say whether you're responding to what's happening, or to what you've already decided it is. And that question doesn't rush for an answer. What if attention doesn't have to work so hard? Think about a moment when you were watching something without a reason to comment, maybe rain on a window, or a fire burning down. You weren't trying to understand it. You weren't improving it. You were just there. Notice how different that feels from the way you usually pay attention. There's no tightening, no pressure to arrive somewhere. Most of the time, attention is tied to an outcome. We look in order to decide. We listen in order to respond. We notice in order to fix. So attention leans forward, always a little ahead of itself. But occasionally, when there's nothing to gain, attention settles. It widens, it stops reaching. And in that settling, reactions become easier to see, not because you're watching them closely, but because there's space around them. A thought arises, a feeling follows, a small impulse to move away or move toward. They don't disappear, they just don't rush the room. This kind of attention isn't sharp, it's not impressive, it doesn't feel like effort. It feels more like standing still and realizing you don't need to lean to stay upright. Once noticed, it raises a quiet question. How often is effort added where none is actually required? So what happens when you don't settle things right away? Consider a conversation that doesn't go as expected, not an argument, just something slightly off. A comment lands awkwardly. There's a pause. Normally, the mind rushes in. It decides who was wrong, what it meant, what should have been said, and then the moment is closed. But imagine leaving it open, not as a technique, just as a fact. You notice the impulse to explain, to correct, to smooth it over, and you don't suppress it, you simply don't follow it yet. The moment stays alive a little longer. It's uncomfortable. There's no clear footing, no conclusion to stand on. But in that uncertainty, something else has room to appear, a nuance, a shift, a response that wasn't available before. Life keeps moving whether you conclude or not. The difference is subtle. One way feels finished, the other feels unfinished, but somehow more honest. And the question that lingers isn't, what is the right interpretation? It's quieter than that. What changes when you let a moment remain as it is, just a bit longer?